One of the greatest sporting comebacks in history is finally complete. Welcome back to Motorsport 101. This might be one of the most feel-good podiums, quite possibly in MotoGP history. It's like Misano 2015 again, when Bradley Smith and Scott Redding were on the podium after one of the wackiest MotoGP races you'll ever watch. People don't talk about it when it's an underrated classic. Anyway, that was self-indulgent of me. Welcome to episode 619, Booyaka Booyaka, of Motorsport 101. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Trey Harrison. Glad you could join us. And, well, we sit in the realm of history. We kind of knew this was happening. We kind of knew a little while ago this was going to happen, but it's kind of weird sitting down and acknowledging that it has finally happened. Yes, that's right. Pecco Bagnaia has won a Grand Prix again.
Been a while.
First win since April. I mean, nothing else really happened during this Grand Prix weekend. I mean, it was pretty quiet up the front, but it's good to see the future Hall of Famer, confirm that he is still a pretty decent bike rider every once in a while. And if anything else happened? No?
Joan Mir got on the podium.
That's nice.
They don't call it the Honda Motor Company for nothing. Topped a speed trap, too, in the race.
Yeah.
Honda's back.
Been a hot minute.
I feel like we're missing something, though. I feel like we're forgetting to mention one big thing.
Pedro Acosta's brake stopped working halfway through. No?
No, something else.
Day that ends in Y for KTM.
Oh, Marc Marquez. Yeah, Marc Marquez wrapped it up. Yeah, of course he did. Yeah, we might have to talk about that a little bit over the course of the next hour or so. A reasonably important incident in that one, but we'll talk a little bit about, quote-unquote, more than a number very, very soon. But joining me in the Pantheos of history is Mr. Cameron Buckley. Hello, sir. Good to see you back.
Hello, everyone. Much like Marc Marquez's career, there's been much suffering since 19. Only my 19 was of the COVID variety.
Oh,
dude.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, last week was just tremendous amounts of ass. It was awful.
Yeah, we watched that NASCAR finish.
Oh my! James Dennis Allen Hamlin.
Look,
Fuck
it was
you.
It was an objectively good finish. ... If you have no stakes attached to any of the people involved, especially one Darrell Wallace Jr.
I'm also a Chase Elliott fan, but I still would have liked to see Bubba win. Just to stick it to NASCAR. Anyways, returning from our NASCAR podcast. God forbid that ever is allowed to happen. They will never allow us anywhere near a NASCAR race ever again.
No,
We're too honest.
If you hear a rattle in my voice, it's because I'm still recovering from it. But one thing that I am not recovering from, we're back. The comeback is complete. I never wavered.
I may have. I'm not going to lie to you.
I never stopped believing, and I never will.
The comeback is fully loaded. It's still. I mean, two notes here from that. One, I still can't believe a man who has middle names named after one of the greatest running backs in NFL history called himself Denny. That will never not be funny to me. If my name was Dennis Allen, I would totally milk that shit. Personally, but what do I know? Second of all, yeah, as a Marc Marquez admirer and have been for many, many years, it's still a bit of a weird feeling. But I'll talk about that a little bit more once we actually get into the nooks and crannies of it all. Also joining me is Mr. RJ O'Connell. Hello, sir.
I said this back in Aragon when he won his first race after leaving Honda. The thing about these comeback stories is that there's supposed to be an element of jeopardy alongside it. And at no point since the start of the season did this ever feel like it was going to go any other way.
Yeah, this championship eventually devolved into kind of one-sided, isn't it?
You know what I mean? Like
Earliest
okay,
title win in MotoGP history.
think of what are some of the other great racing comebacks? Like
Mick Doohan.
off the top of your head, Mick Doohan.
Nicky
Okay, maybe
Lauda.
that didn't have any elements of jeopardy into it.
Yeah, well, the first 2 years it did because his leg was hanging off the motorcycle because all of the nerves were dead and he couldn't feel his leg falling off the peg. But by 1994, boots, asses, etc.
Right.
Yeah, Nicky Lauda is really the obvious one when people think about racing and the history of comebacks, and it's a different kind of comeback. I feel, but a lot of people were very quick to make that
Yeah.
comparison as a way of trying to talk down the Marquez comeback. I know not everybody who covers bikes are necessarily Formula One fans. That's understandable. A lot of them are very territorial about these sorts of things, but we'll talk about that a little bit more when we actually get into the nitty gritty of it. But I do think it's an interesting, like cross sport comparisons are always a bit funky, even within motorsport, let alone sport as a whole. Everybody's idea of what makes a great comeback can be different, and that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes discussion interesting about them, which I hope is part of the reason why you listen to this.
It's what it would also make it a terrible Hollywood script because there's no like conflict. This conflict wasn't a conflict. It was a one-sided ass whooping from start to finish this year.
But I think the comeback nature of it is more down to what he was going through on a Honda as opposed to a Ducati. That's your hook for the main plot of the story, I would say. So if I was going to make MotoGP the movie, and someone from Top Gun Maverick wanted to remake that, then I think that's where you would call me as a scriptwriter. Call me, I'm available. But we'll be talking a little bit about Marc Marquez, of course, and the nature of his comeback. Pecco Bagnaia back in the winner's circle for the first time in nearly 6 months. Joan Mir and Honda's best result since Marquez left them in his first podium finish in 3 years. Pedro Acosta and how the protagonist of him was quickly faded over the course of the race. A little bit more about Dorna and the context of the Hall of Fame and potential erasure of history, which has got a lot of people talking recently. Now we know a little bit more of the concrete details about it. If I get prompts further discussion, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And some silly season talk as well, because we got confirmation that we're going to be down one Portuguese rider in MotoGP next year for sure, and he'll be heading across the pond to World Superbikes. But where, Chris Kamara? We'll find out later. In the meantime, here's a good places you can find us. We are on youtube.com/motorsport101. We're on facebook.com/motorsport101. We're on Twitter at motorsport_101. If you want to follow our personal handles on Blue Sky, you can. Dre Harrison, cbuckley917, and RJ O'Connell at bluesky.social. We're also on Instagram, motorsport101pod. We're on TikTok at M101_podcast. Check us out on there for video highlights of the show themselves. And if you really, really like us, you can back us financially on Patreon, patreon.com/motorsport101. $5 gets you early access to all of our content, and it's another outlet for those who can't access the website for all of our written content as well. You can upgrade to the $10 tier so you can listen to these episodes live as they're being recorded, as Jason is doing so right now. And of course, you can get all those details and more on our website, motorsport101.com, including a review of this I say a review of the race. I kind of bypassed that this weekend, to be completely honest with you.
It wasn't a classic, let's say.
No. And if it was, I probably would have ham-hocked it in there anyway, but I wrote an article with one very bold declaration that I think the debate of who the GOAT of MotoGP is over.
We gotta talk about that after the transition.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a minute. Sincere thanks to everyone who shared it on social media. We didn't expect it to be our most read piece of 2025. So thanks. And apparently it was also on the MotoGP subreddit. So thanks to everyone that was for sharing the good word. I'm very grateful for that.
Thanks, Redditors.
We did it, Reddit. I guess. Okay. That's cool to know. Also, big thanks to everyone that shared it on social media, of course. And Ask Dre is up there as well. That went up today. Some fun stuff about Mick Schumacher potentially going to IndyCar. Connor Zilic and his future. Roman Grosjean and his goodbye test in Formula 1. There's some fun questions in there this month. Do check that out when you get a chance. But time for the cool transition as we talk about the MotoGP's Japanese Grand Prix.
He was beautiful. He was the point of difference. He has always been the point of difference. Unparalleled. And maybe today there will, of course, always be those who argue, always be those who debate. And the debate can rage on if you like. But as he falls in love with the object in the world that his heart most desired, it is hard to escape the supposition that he has rendered himself today the greatest of all time.
In the feel-good podium of 2025, Pecco Bagnaia, for at least one weekend, returned to his former greatness. A perfect weekend for the back-to-back world champion who broke the lap record in qualifying, led every lap of the weekend from start to finish, en route to a double victory. His first since the Solidarity Grand Prix at the end of 2024, despite an engine scare with oil leaking from his engine in the race itself. Of course, in third place, it was Joan Mir, who was making all manner of shapes en route to Honda and Mir's first podium finish since 2022 and 2023, respectively. But of course, you all know, if you're listening, you didn't even need to know by listening to this that you know that the flowers went to the man in second, as Marc Marquez took a pair of comfortable second places, one in the sprint, one in the Grand Prix, to seal his 9th World Championship across all classes of motorcycle racing at the World Championship level, his 7th in the Premier class. How many is that? Enough to prove a point. Dre, is Marc Marquez now the greatest MotoGP rider of all time?
It's a good question. We're just going to rip the Band-Aid off straight away, and I will give you a one-word answer. Yes, I think it is. I think
thanks
that's
for
it.
listening, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for
Please,
listening, everybody.
find
Take
us
care.
real quick.
Yeah. Anyway, no. One, like I said, it's kind of weird seeing it all play out how it actually did in the end, and actually having it sink in that no, this is happening. I mean, some of the stats that sum all this up, I think, are poetic. He's the youngest ever MotoGP World Champion. He won it when he was 20 back in 2013, his very first season in the top flight. He's now the 5th oldest MotoGP champion in Premier Class history at 32. No one has had a championship winning career as long as Marc. We're talking, 12 years between his first title and his latest one. No one has ever gone more than 5 years without winning between winning Premier Class titles. Normally, once your peak is gone, it doesn't normally come back. It's easy to forget that Valentino Rossi rode for another 12 years after he won his final championship. He came very, very close, but he didn't quite get another one. Famously got very close a couple of times, but it never quite happened for Rossi again after 2009. And while the immediate hit of dopamine isn't because this was a dramatic title win, he's had one hand on the crown since arguably the summer break. Seeing the whole picture and the whole canvas of Marc Marquez, his career, his journey, and the return to the promised land, no MotoGP rider I can think of has ever had to deal with the adversity that man has had to go through to get back to this place. A place that even he wasn't sure he was ever going to get back to. Cam could talk about how he never lost faith. Marc did at times. Marc was considering retirement at one point. This is a man who has been through over 100 crashes since his last title in 2019. A man that's had to have 4 surgeries on that broken arm he suffered in Jerez back in 2020. The COVID-affected year, that dastardly turn 3 at Jerez that almost derailed McDoohan's career in years past. The 2 bouts of Dipalopa, the bone graft getting infected, the plate breaking, the fact his humerus had twisted 34 degrees out of joint because of the amount of strain and stress, and the fact his arm never healed properly, having to go to the Mayo Clinic, as a last roll of the dice to try and save his career. The fallout with Honda, the team he loved, the team he was in tears with when he had to announce he had to leave. Going to Ducati, riding for free, leaving 25 million euros on the table to walk away from Honda, just to prove to himself that he could still do it again, and then actually doing it again. He's in the middle of an 11-win MotoGP season right now at age 32, and he has crushed one of the most loaded MotoGP fields you've ever seen in order to do it. It's utterly, utterly remarkable. It is straight out of Hollywood as far as I'm concerned. And
point that, look, other people may not have given up that Marc Marquez could still do this, even if Marc Marquez himself questioned that he could. But just think, if the Marc Marquez that came in flashes when he was trying to come back from his injury, and it wasn't there. We saw him take a couple of wins near the end of his time in Honda, but it was clear that, he wasn't 100%. And if that's the case, if that's the Marc Marquez that wasn't 100% sure he could still do this, just imagine what could have happened if not for July 19th, 2020. We would be talking about him as the greatest MotoGP rider by a wide margin.
There are many people in the paddock who believed if he didn't try and rush to come back, he would have won every world title in between 2020 and 2023 anyway, because people in that paddock speak in awe of how good this man is. Matt Oxley wrote a fantastic piece about Is Marquez the GOAT? I do highly recommend you use your one free Motorsport magazine article a week to read it if you can. Paywalls help journalism. Support your sites. But you get the gist in that so many people in the paddock speak about Marquez as if he is truly an alien, not just the one word we use to describe elite MotoGP riders. He is the alien of aliens. His receptiveness to feedback, the ability to be able to save crashes that no one else can, his ability to live in a dangerous zone and still be so fast without crashing or being able to ride through issues and temperament and have that level of adaptability, and of course twinned with outrageous raw speed unlike anything we've ever seen in this sport. I admit I was fuming. I wasn't sure about whether Marc could do this or not, because we'd never seen anything like what Marc had gone through. You look at the scar on that arm, and it still makes you pause and take breath, because that's not normal. That, and Marc being on that plane in his documentary and telling Honda executives, I didn't do this to finish in 10th. I did it because I think I can win. And if I can't do it here, I'll do it elsewhere. And him eventually sticking to that promise and now doing so with Ducati is remarkable. I mean, Cal, I want you to get a word in as well, because I don't want to completely hijack the discussion, but it is wild what we've seen.
I'll bring a bit of obscure Destiny lore into this. To even exist in this space in MotoGP is at the top echelon of it, is to constantly demand your own existence. Marc Marquez refused to go away, even as everything, his arm, his bike, his team, the very nature of the sport as it pivoted towards aerodynamics and ride height devices. And Ducati cracked that code before everyone else and still reigned supreme over this field. He refused to go away. He bet everything on himself. He bet that if he left Honda, even if he was riding for free, if he boiled it down to myself as a man riding a motorcycle and nothing else, I can still do this. And he won that bet. He won that bet to such a degree that Ducati blew up the strength they had as a manufacturer to ditch their champion Jorge Martin, to ditch Premac, their secondary works team, to blow up their rider set to the point where they lost multiple riders beyond their champion to bring in Marc. And it paid off. He completely validated every ounce of faith they had in him.
You make a very good point. They told Jorge Martin to kick rocks. A man that would go on to win that year's championship. A man who beat the factory team at his own game and proved wrong everything we'd said about him. About the fact he wasn't a consistent rider, the fact that he had a case of the bozo gene. Remember, he had that crash in Germany halfway through the year. He was leading with 2 laps to go, tucked the front and crashed. He took it personally. He didn't crash again for the rest of the season. You know, it was... Martin listened. He became a points rider overnight and beat the best in the world at the time, or so we thought was the best in the world at the time, en route to a title. And Ducati basically said, we can afford to make that sacrifice, because they knew how good Marquez was. I remember when... I remember Davide Tardozzi after seeing Marquez in Jerez, the first year he was at Gresini. He knew. He'd seen the data. He'd seen enough.
Because they had all seen the data and they saw that on a bike which was missing probably 3.5 tenths, he was knocking on the door of Bagnaia and Martin pretty much every weekend.
Yeah.
He was putting a bike that, still very good, but not the best, where it really didn't have a right to be. Winning races against, the Phillip Island race last year, where he completely botched his own race and then made good on it through sheer force of will.
Yeah.
Beyond Marc as a motorcycle rider, and all he has accomplished and all he is still yet to accomplish upon a 2-wheel death missile, this is about Marc Marquez the man. And just sheer fucking force of will to have to burn down your own career to start again. And again, he bet everything on himself. He believed that he could still do this, and if he wasn't able to, if he went to Ducati and wasn't the Marc Marquez that we've known and seen, he was going to hang it up. Well, he was still that guy, and he is still that guy, and he is now 9-time champion of the world.
He promised his granddad he would hang it up if he couldn't figure it out on a Ducati. He said this was my last chance, and he did it. And there were so many cool things about this. Like I think Alex summed it up best. His brother Alex, when he talked to the media after the race, where even on Instagram, he basically said, "Only I know how much you've cried, how many tears you've shed, how much pain you've had to go through to get back to this point." I've been watching Marc Marquez from the time he was a teenager racing in the 125cc class. He bawled his eyes out when he was watching that screen on the corner of the track. And, Ducati's very well put together more than a number video, which great reference towards Dorna and the World Championship debate.
Incredible degree of petty. So petty we could have named him Richard.
Yeah, it was beautifully done.
Right, Dre, like he was rewatching. They were replaying that video in the cool down room, and he couldn't watch it because we, as brutal as it is for us as onlookers to watch it, he did it. He felt every surgery, every broken bone, all 108 crashes. Some of those were practically 5 or 6 a weekend in the nadir of Honda's disastrous 2023 season.
People thought he didn't have it anymore because he was just putting the bike on the ground too many times.
And in between him putting the bike on the ground, he was getting pole positions on a motorcycle that otherwise wasn't capable of scoring points.
Again, sheer fucking will. The emotion, the tears, the fact
Screaming bloody murder on the cooldown in his own helmet.
And even the personal changes. He's got his partner Gemma now. He's moved out of the family home. He lives in Madrid now. He's had to do a lot of growing up. This is not the Mark, I have nothing to lose, racing gangster of his 20s. This is now a man who's 32 years of age, and he's had to do a lot of growing up, and he has a family now, and he's got people to worry and think about. And yeah, we've known this was coming for a while, but when you actually see it all come together, it was one of the most genuine, emotional championship wins I can ever remember. It reminded me of Nicky Hayden in 2006. Nicky, who bawled his eyes out, couldn't quite believe he'd actually done it, and it was a title fight which didn't have the toxicity of Valentino. Even Valentino was such. Even he was.
That's how nice Nicky Hayden was. That's how good a dude this guy was. Even Valentino couldn't find a reason to hate this guy.
Yeah, it was just like, I can't say anything about him because he's just such a gentleman. And they shook hands. They Hayden was in tears. His dad Earl was in tears. Roger was in tears, and all of that. And it reminded me a lot of that. It was just I've never seen Mark cry like that. In all the years I've seen him as a MotoGP rider, it was an incredibly powerful sequence. And yeah, people will have the room split about contrived title celebrations, even though Valentino Rossi wrote the book on those and we all loved them back then. But it was the simplicity of it. Here's your world champion stand, come this way, here's your red helmet, here's a giant screen, and here's what this all means. And I know people that have been in bikes for 30, 40 years who were crying and were feeling weak watching this, because it's a title that not only represents, for me, the greatest bike rider we've ever seen, a man who's had to rewrite how to ride a motorcycle since he arrived in the top flight, but just the people who know truly understand just how incredible a comeback this is. As I said before, I think if you really want to play the cross-sport comparison game, Niki Lauda's the obvious one. That was a man who took in so many toxic fumes that he was read the last rites on the operating table. Nearly died on that. He had half his face burned off, lost part of his ear. He was back in a racing car 6 weeks later, which is still one of the most remarkable feats you'll ever see in human life, let alone that. It's a different kind of comeback, in my opinion. It's not the sheer shock value or coming back from, trying to turn around and get back in an F1 car as quickly as possible. But it's ridiculous in its own different way, because it's taken 5 years for Mark to get back to this place.
Yeah.
5.
Yeah, I'd say it's even more remarkable than other. What are some of the other sporting comebacks you could think of? Michael Jordan came back after 2 years away and won 3 more titles on top of the 3 they won, but he didn't come back from an injury that threatened his entire livelihood. He came back from deciding he wanted to play baseball.
The Chicago Bulls weren't lottery level when he came back, let's say. And again, and when Mark had come back in 21 with one arm, famously, Jack Miller saying he came and whipped out all of our asses with one arm. It really was, because that humerus had rotated 34 degrees out of place after the infection that he had the second surgery to then fix. And they just collapsed from there, as the bike that Paul Espargaro and all the other Honda riders had chosen to develop, well, all they had accomplished was taking away what was good about the Honda, and in the meantime, Ducati had finally cracked the code with the ride height devices, with what would become our now production-ready ground effect aerodynamics, and the whole sport had shifted by the time Mark was 100%.
I forgot that Marc Marquez won 3 races in 2021 with one arm. That's the thing. He may have lost faith in his ability to do this, but just me sitting on the couch watching these either on my own or with friends. I was just like, dog, if he gets back to 100% and if he's on a bike that's consistently capable of giving the results that his talent suggests that he has in him, he still has in him, he wins every title, uncontested, straight up.
And
It's
the
like
scarier
it's
thing
like
is, RJ,
imagining, yeah.
he's not at 100%, and he never will be. That arm is always, now and forever, going to give him trouble in the long right-handers. And yet,
Could have fooled me.
if this is Mark forevermore at about 95 to 96%, that is more than enough.
He is one of the most remarkable athletes I've ever seen in motorsport. So it's in a long-winded way of wrapping it around back to the start of this. The numbers hold up. They're not the greatest ever. They're still these. When you look at the big
Still in
counting
progress,
stats,
mind you.
Yep.
Yeah, we're still going. 99 Grand Prix wins, 74 in the top flight. You know, I think it's something like 72 pole positions, 70 plus fastest laps, over 120 career podium finishes. You know, he's second on the all-time sprint wins list with 15. And the format's only been around since 2023 because he's won 15 of them this year. He's now tied Valentino Rossi for 7 Premier Class World titles. Only Agostini has more. He has 9 in total. That's only behind Agostini and Angel Nieto.
Also, a great touch on the more than a number gear is there's 9 stripes across the shirt, which is, again, just deliciously petty.
It's gloriously petty. I mean, like I said, the numbers are, for me, they're equivalent enough. And the fact it's still ongoing to add to those, that's the last. I mean, this is like, my brother's got a great theory when it comes to like ring chasing, and that, for example, the 2011 NBA championship, the Dirk Nowitzki won, for example, because of the nature of having to go against effectively basketball's version of the Monstars, where it was LeBron, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh on the same roster, and having to overcome that. He calls it one of the heaviest ring in NBA history because of the nature of who they had to beat to win it. This is the Dirk Nowitzki ring. This is 6 years in the making to complete one of the greatest sporting comebacks of all time. For me, that's enough. It's over. It's over. It's finished. He's the greatest of all time.
Dre, you wrote in your piece. This is like the shot of Lionel Messi on what would likely be his last chance to win the big prize that he'd never won, FIFA Men's World Cup, and he just goes out there and does it.
And to quickly become a football podcast for a minute, that was Messi's 5th World Cup. That was him at 35 years of age. A guy that had been doing this since the time he was 19, and Argentinian football had been basically, for the most part, underachievers on the global stage for World Cups for some time because they were never able to get all their attacking talent together, or that they didn't have the right coach. It wasn't the right time. There was a better country to come along, like France, for example. France won one in the middle of that run, and they had this glorious team of magnificent black players like Paul Pogba and N'Golo Kante, Ousmane Dembele. Congrats to his Ballon d'Or lot. He won last week, by the way. It goes on, and that was the last shot, really, that Messi had, and he was the World Cup. He was arguably the best player at the World Cup that year. He scored twice in the final. He withheld the Kylian Mbappe World Cup final hat-trick, which is about as close as you get to Yugi versus the Pharaoh at the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! Essentially, as a final boss. And then they both score in the shootouts at the end. It's that fantastic sum up from the great commentator Peter Drury at the end, when he has to basically try and put a loop on all of it. And it's still etched in my memory, and I inserted it across the piece I wrote to describe it, where he goes, "He was beautiful. He is the point of difference. He has always been the point of difference. Unparalleled. And maybe today there will, of course, always be those who argue, always those who debate. And the debate can rage on if you like. But as he falls in love with the object in the world that his heart most desired, it is hard to escape the supposition that he has rendered himself today the greatest of all time. It's one of the great commentary calls I can ever remember, because it's just so perfect. And it's how I can't think of anything better to describe Marc Marquez than that, quite frankly. Because for me, he is the greatest of all time.
He's a true original. He is one of one. They ain't making any more of those.
Without a doubt. Other loose ends from the Japanese Grand Prix at Mobility Resort Motegi. Pecco Bagnaia won both the sprint and the Grand Prix. Why don't you talk to me about, what had to change to make this happen? And more importantly, can we stop trying to ship this guy to Yamaha?
I hope it doesn't come down to that, because, look, we take the piss out of him. I need to make one thing very clear about Pecco Bagnaia, right? This was his 31st Premier Class victory. He now has the exact same amount as Danny Pedrosa and Eddie Lawson. Only seven men in history have more Grand Prix wins than him at the highest level. 7. That's it. He is a phenomenal bike rider. I know this whole it's kind of become a bit fun to rag on Pecco, and it's getting a bit weird how people talk to him like he's like a child at times. Like, oh, look at Pecco, he's come back. Look how great this. It's almost disrespectful to a degree, but he was perfect. He was phenomenal this weekend. He was. The telltale sign, Pecco normally comes into weekends and gets better as the weekend comes on. He was fastest in first practice, and I was like, uh-oh. That's only the 3rd time he's ever done that in his Grand Prix career, where he's been fastest in the first practice session. That's normally a sign that he's on it. And it never stopped. Broke the lap record in qualifying, led every single racing lap of the weekend, was not touchable. Maybe Marquez was only at about 90% of his true ability because he didn't want to take any chances towards, his ultimate goal of winning the championship. But take nothing away from Pecco. He was phenomenal this weekend. He destroyed the field on this one, and that was the Pecco of old. That's the Pecco where if he's on it at a weekend, just pencil both wins in now, because no one's gonna touch him.
That's the Pecco that I picked to win the world title, and you know what? I'm happy to be wrong.
It's only the second most incorrect prediction of the Motorsport 101 universe this year.
I got to be happy that I was wrong to see the greatest comeback in sporting history. I didn't think it would be this one-sided, mind you.
No, I don't think any of us did. I know, I certainly didn't. That's for damn sure.
I expected it to be one-sided. I didn't expect it to be 5 races early. Also, with a puffing engine because, it wasn't leaking oil so much as it was burning oil. Insert joke about 70s Harley-Davidsons here, but yeah, kind of just engine was dying a slow death across the second half of the race. Mark actually took a huge amount of time out of him, and then kind of tailed off because he didn't know if said bike was leaking or not, so just took it a little easy those last couple laps.
Didn't want to risk it just in case it was an oil spill. It wasn't in the end. I know one of MotoGP's technical directors was in the garage saying, is he leaking? Because if he is, we've got to meatball him, for safety reasons. And GG was adamant he wasn't. He wasn't, in all fairness.
Burning oil, not leaking.
There is a difference. But the main kicker in this, and again, full credit to David Emmett being the person who spotted this in his weekend notes. If you're not subscribed to motomatters.com, I do highly recommend doing so. It's the best €5 a month you'll spend on motorsport journalism. But he pointed out that Pecco Bagnaia's frame was particularly shiny, and that they had taken a scrutineering sticker off the front of the frame, which is normally an indicator of a team that doesn't want to know who's riding said bike. Which says to us, and said to David, Pecco was basically back on a GP24 this weekend.
Let's call it a GP 24.63, shall we? Everything that could possibly be 24 components, except for the frame, because of the engine being different, that does have to be a GP 25-ish frame. But the thing is that the actual frame is not fully homologated. Like, you can change other things on it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest things that changed this year between the 24 and the 25 that we now know is they changed a lot of the steering head geometry to try and stop the rear pushing the front, death taxes Ducati tucks the front problem that would cause them to just... It would cause them to just randomly tuck the front in previous years. And just Pecco didn't like that. So this appears to be about as much of a 24 as they can get away with. Ride height device, swing arm, front forks, frame as much as possible, the whole 9 yards.
Apparently, the Misano test was the breakthrough. It was basically Casey Stoner talking with their main rider coach, Manuel Poggiali. He could ride a bit back in his day, in his own right. And they basically came to the agreement that because Bagnaia was shaking so much riding the 25 package and the lack of comfort, and as Cam alluded to, the rear pushing the front of the bike around, Casey was the kicker to tell Ducati, go back to 24 and as much as you can, because Ducati didn't want to do it. They didn't want to revert their packages back for basically 3/4 of the season. And this was the weekend where they went back, and ironically, it's the first one where Pecco looks like himself all season.
Well, here's the deal. Motorcycle engineers will only listen to a rider to a certain extent. And we saw the most public example of this being Marc and Honda. Marc telling them pretty much every time they change the bike after 15, yeah, it doesn't feel good. We need to fix the bike. Well, what's there to fix? You're winning.
Winner!
The data says that it's an improvement. What's that data? That you won. You were faster than everyone else. And Ducati's actually been very good in really the last couple years in understanding, maybe this isn't an improvement. Again, the 25 is not a bad bike. It's not a slow bike. It just doesn't have that usability of the 24. It doesn't have the feel. That said, Marc Marquez is just as fast with all of them because he's tried every combination that they've done so far this year. He's just as fast.
He rode a 24. He rode a 24 at the test, and he said, "Listen, they're about the same in terms of speed. It's just they both generate their lap time differently. Basically, one's more about stability, and one is more about engine and corner entry." Is what he basically said, and yeah. Essentially, Stoner was the kicker to tell them to go back. And if you're Bagnaia, first of all, I'm genuinely really happy for him. He's a good dude. He's handled a horrendous season about as professionally as you could ever wish someone to handle a season where your teammate is beating your ass by 250 points. Pecco was... I mean, the nearest he got to a crash out was when he said he ran out of patience. I think that was in Austria or Misano, and I can't blame him for all of that because it had to have been so frustrating having to go through that, seeing your teammate, and he got no beef with Marc. I mean, they seemingly get along very well actually, in their respective Ducati camps, and seeing him win. Again, I mean, at this point, Marc won 7 in a row when I'm in the middle of the season, and you're struggling to get on the podium. That must be immensely frustrating. So first of all, I'm just really happy he got a win, and you could see the relief in his eyes as he got that win. And the first thing he even said after the race was, "I don't even really want to celebrate because I don't want to take anything away from Marc because it's his moment." He's such a gentleman. He really is. That is another man that's done a lot of growing up over the years, and you could see it with him and how he handles himself professionally. He's a class act. He always has been. And just Ducati almost essentially threw away 2/3 of a season because they weren't prepared to listen to Pecco. And that must be just immensely frustrating, given that this is a team that's had to replace, change, tweak almost every element of that GP25, trying to figure out why Pecco was I don't even necessarily want to say slow, because he wasn't dreadful a lot of the time on this bike. He was just not marked. And
he had a few races where he was out in Q1. And for his standard, that's beyond unacceptable.
But he also has 10 Grand Prix podiums this year. I'm not going to pretend like this was a dreadful year for Pecco. Like, this is not... Like, it wasn't great last case of mentioning until the back end.
Well, how do you evaluate a multiple-time MotoGP World Champion? If we're evaluating him in the context of championships, then real bad.
Oh, well, the thing is, though, is that only you were so insistent that Marc was going to be this year. I didn't, so I was a little bit more...
I didn't think Pecco would nearly lose third to Marco Bezzecchi on Aprilia. And he's still not out of the danger zone with that either.
But Aprilia is good now! Like, Bez took 4th place this weekend, and that was like a disappointment because he was nowhere in the leading frame. That's how good Aprilia is now. Where they're looking at 4th like, oh, no, that's kind of poor for Bez this weekend. Do you see how the goalposts have moved? Like, it's not the same sport that it was a couple of years ago. But no, it goes to show you that, as far as I'm concerned, Ducati's season this year has been a mess on and off the track, but they've got away with it because of Marquez. This GP25 has fundamentally not worked, right? Apart from Marc, because Marc is such a freak. Pecco Bagnaia has had his worst season in Grand Prix in half a decade. And where's DJ Antonio been all season?
Great. Where have we heard this story before where a manufacturer is just seemingly in all sorts of disarray, but Marc Marquez is papering over a lot of cracks? And I'm not saying that Ducati now is as bad a shape as Honda was near the end of Marquez's tenure, but it is a familiar tune.
I think Cam's line that he borrowed about engineers not listening to people when they win very much is a very true sentiment when it comes to describing this season, because it has been a hot mess in that, at least on that side of the Ducati garage. And again, you can debate the merits of 24 versus 25 all you want, but when one of the most important riders in Ducati's history effectively has a whole season thrown away because the development of your latest bike didn't suit him, that is a failure. You have gone wrong here somewhere. But again, because Marc is just that good, they got away with it. If it wasn't for Marc, we'd be having very, very panic station-based conversations about an inevitable Alex Marquez championship win. Think about that for a minute. Like, it says a lot about the state of play.
It still satisfies you.
Let's not forget what it took the first time Ducati had to blow it all up, development-wise. When Valentino went there and said, the bike is completely useless. After years of Casey Stoner telling them, this bike is awful, change it, and them going, yeah, but you're winning.
Those chickens always come back to roost eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when the field is now more competitive than it's been in a long, long time. Like I said, I think if it wasn't for Marc, Bez has 4 or 5 wins this season, and we're having a very different conversation about the state of the field. We're probably saying, how did Ducati lose this gap so quickly? And, we can go into the concessions working. Aprilia's genuinely made games. KTM's, like, on a good day is now up there with them as well. This was not a good day for them. But, there's elements at play here across the board, but I still maintain Ducati got away with one here. And I hope they take their lessons from this season, despite the success and the inevitable racing leather smelling of champagne. Just a thought.
On the topic of Marc Marquez's old employer, Joan Mir got 3rd, as mentioned. Honda back on the podium at Honda's home track. That's another guy who really could have used this, because for times we were thinking like Joan Mir is going to get packed and smoked over the World Superbikes within the next year or so.
Yeah, it's been getting better the second half of the season, but you still wouldn't call it good. A huge portion of that is not his fault. He did get wiped out by other bikes 3 races in a row at one point this year. Mir was tying that motorcycle into knots, keeping that thing in third place. Just about every braking zone was a crash where he didn't hit anything. And that is the Mir that has been missing for so long in MotoGP. The Honda that has been missing for so long in MotoGP. They topped the speed traps. Registered over 196 mile per hour on the straight here. And that's ain't a long straight.
No, it's not.
They're not back yet. But this is a substantial step forward.
Yeah, considering the dire straits
Marini
we were
also
in.
was having a good weekend. Fortunately, a clutch put an end to his race.
Yeah, it's a big step in the right direction. Honda's been digging themselves out of a hole for some time.
Hurling parts at that motorcycle every race.
It's the most competitive they've looked all season, quite frankly.
It's the most competitive they've looked in probably 4 years, Dre.
Yeah. Dry race.
Alex Rins' win at Coda being probably the sole exception to that.
Yeah, and Coda tends to be a bit of an outlier sort of track in the first place. But yeah, it's the best they've looked since Marquez has left them comfortably. A legitimate podium, no shenanigans, no fuss, on merit. We know Joan Mir is a quality bike rider. You don't fluke a world championship in any way, shape, or form. This is not a bubble ring in any way, shape, or form. He was great in a season where a lot of people weren't. That's not Mir's fault. That's the sport's fault. He's a great rider. He always has been. And he's now reaping the rewards of his perseverance because he's been through a lot of shit in that team himself. He's had a lot of crashes, a lot of people have taken him out. He's suffered a lot of horrendous luck and pressure to succeed. To basically salvage his career because he was a fantastic Suzuki rider alongside Alex Rins when Suzuki was on the grid, and now it's not anymore. And having to make that switch to a Honda team that was in the midst of its nadir, so to speak, that would be difficult for anybody. It was difficult for Marc, let alone someone who isn't Marc.
Literally and philosophically broke him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is good to see them back. That said, to curl it back to the Pecco discussion, this was also one race. I don't know what would be more funny next round, whether Pecco is possessed by the spirit of the aliens and he looks like Prime Lorenzo out there, or if he's fighting with Miguel Oliveira for P12.
We'll have to wait and see on that one. A couple other notes to move on before we get to our other big discussion for the night. Jorge Martin, get well soon, buddy.
God.
That was a horrendous...
I'm tired of saying that sentence this year, man.
His 4th major injury of the season. 4th. Broke his collarbone in a sickening crash at the start of the Grand Prix where he just,
Sprint.
Well, sprint, I should say, yeah. But where he... Again, it was very similar to Fabio Quartararo's at Balloton Park, where he's lost control of his brakes, tried to shoot the gap on the inside of the corner, and can't get it stopped, initiates contact, wipes himself out and his teammate Marco Bezzecchi, and Martin broke his collarbone on the way down. Thankfully, if you've seen some of the pictures, we're very, very lucky it was just a broken collarbone. It was another one where he was body out in front of other bikes that were coming towards the apex, so to speak. So yeah, we're very fortunate it was just a broken collarbone. He's had surgery on it early yesterday at the time of recording. He's definitely going to miss Indonesia. We'll have to wait and see how much else he misses on top of that, because collarbones, you can ride on those injuries sometimes, depending on the break and severity. Yeah, depends.
Or if you're just Torre Lorenzo and you are out of your fucking mind in your prime.
But hey, despite all the shittiness that Jorge Martin just cannot catch a fucking break this year, seemingly reinforcing the superstitious curse of the number 1 plate, we did get all the regular riders together for a group photo for the first time stints before we had sprints at every round.
Yeah, and then we had Martin miss the Grand Prix with a broken collarbone, and Iogura had to pull out because of pain in his right hand.
It's race dog.
Just to sum up where we're at in terms of injuries and whatnot, that's what we're dealing with right now. It is hard for us to get a full healthy grid in MotoGP these days. It doesn't happen often. Again, get well soon, Jorge. I mean, that man, if he didn't have bad luck, he'd have no luck. Just another horrendous injury, and the man is beat up. He just needs time on the bike more than anything else. He just needs track time. It's so important. But we'll have to see how he recovers and heals from that. Pedro Acosta was a ball of frustration as well in his own right. Like, he was running second and then slowly lost his way. He couldn't get the bike stopped towards the end and ended up in the gravel trap. Recovered, but was out of the points by the time the race was over. That was rough. Here's the interesting one, because the big debate has rumbled on in regards to Dorna and how it's handling its World Championships, how it's handling how the sport is presented, because we got more details on this. The Hall of Fame is essentially an extension of the Legends wing they normally had. We had hardline criteria. They had to win 2 Premier Class titles or 25 Premier Class wins in order to get into the Hall of Fame. You may have seen that at Misano. There was rumblings behind the scenes to tell Marc Marquez, hey, if you're going to celebrate this championship, do you mind not mentioning the 9 world titles and call it 7, please? There's rumors they might try and mandate the number 1 plate as a must run for the champion next year, no matter what, as a hard-lined rule.
After what we just discussed.
Yeah.
Well, there is that, but there's also, it is Ducati corporate policy. You win a championship, you run number 1. So it's like, there's going to be a pile of conflicting interests here.
You tell Mark that. Go on. Please, I dare you. You tell him that. Anyway.
This is how we get him to retire.
Is this a good move from Dorna or a dangerous wiping of history? And I need to point this out because a lot of people on socials have gotten this wrong. No, this is not a Liberty Media move. I know a lot of people are very quick to blame Formula One because it's Formula One, and to a degree I get why, but from what I've been told by people in the know, and just quite frankly, if you've been watching the sport for the last 2 or 3 years, you've been able to tell this has been coming. This is not a Liberty Media play. This is a Dorna play. This is them pushing MotoGP to the forefront while pushing the smaller categories back. And this is now seemingly the nitroglycerin on the fire that's going to accelerate that going into 2026.
This has been kind of the path since 500cc became MotoGP, and those bikes got way, way bigger and more advanced 4-stroke engines all the way back in 2002, where 250 and 125, which we now know is Moto 3 and Moto 2, and again, those bikes have bigger engines than what they had when they were 250 and 125. In the 250 and 125 class, you could make a legitimate career out of it, right? You did not have to move up to 500s to justify yourself. If you wanted to ride an intermediate class bike or a lightweight class bike, you could do that for an entire career and nobody would give you shit about it, right?
Right.
In the MotoGP era, that's changed. It's clear now that 250 and 125 and now Moto 2 and Moto 3, now those are more feeder categories. The way we think of as NASCAR is the example I draw back on. Sorry again for making this a NASCAR podcast, but there was once a time where you could make a career being the best driver in what we will call the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series next year. That used to be Busch Grand National. You could make a career out of being the best Craftsman Truck Series driver. You could make a whole career out of that. You didn't even really need to step up to the Cup Series or even be good at it. You could just... There's even guys on like the short track scene, like Richie Evans won 9 NASCAR Modified Series titles, making him the best driver in the discipline of modified racing. Would you put him in the same category as Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, or Jimmy Johnson? I mean, he's got 2 more NASCAR titles than any of those 3, though it was in a regional lower level championship, an entirely different discipline.
It's always been difficult, and look, I openly admit I've kind of gone back and forth on this one because a lot of people have made very strong points on either side of the aisle here. First of all, the Hall of Fame makes sense. And it makes sense because of Dorna's own decision making. They kind of had to atone for the fact that they got a bit too liberal with its definition of legend in the modern age. No disrespect to him. Marco Simoncelli probably isn't a MotoGP Hall of Famer. Nicky Hayden probably isn't a MotoGP Hall of Famer. The Giracato, tragic as his death was,
Didn't get a chance to be.
Yeah, didn't get a chance to really be a MotoGP legend. You know, Loris Capirossi was inducted a couple of years ago. His number was retired. The 65, you can't use the 65 anymore in Grand Prix motorcycle racing. You know, there are guys who... I mean, Andrea Dovizioso is probably the big one. A guy who was a very, very good rider, but only ever won the world title at 125 level. Is he a MotoGP quote-unquote legend? Probably not. So I think they felt like they probably had to atone for that by having a Hall of Fame with definitive criteria. And it had to be obviously more than what the induction was for a legend because they'd gotten a bit too liberal with the people they'd put in that wing. So having 2 Premier Class titles or 25 wins, which, by the way, only 11 riders have ever had 25 MotoGP wins, ever, you know, as a way of getting in, and I think they did that for Kevin Schwantz because he only ever won 1 title, but he has 25 career wins at the top flight. There you go, see? They wanted to get certain people in, but they kind of had to atone for that at a certain point because they kind of goosed themselves on that one. I'm conflicted on this overall because on the one hand, the history of bike racing isn't just about who were Premier Class champions. Some of the greatest riders like Court Ballington, you know, and Angel Nieto is the big one. That's the big smoking gun that everybody has pulled out, and rightly so. He won 12+1 world titles on 125 and 50cc machinery when the Premier Class back then was, 350? You know, 350cc bikes or 500cc bikes later on in bike racing's history. But it wasn't just that. Angel Nieto was so influential. You probably wouldn't have Marc Marquez if it wasn't for him because he was so close to royalty and he was such a huge celebrity that he put bike racing on the map in Spain. His influence is priceless to Spanish bike racing. So to not put Angel Nieto in the Hall of Fame, and for me, is a mistake. Because, yes, it wasn't Premier Class success, but his legacy goes beyond that. There's a reason why Valentino Rossi and Marc Marquez both pay tribute to him when they both surpassed his 90 win count. There's good reason for that, because he was revered as one of the greatest, even though he never won or competed at Premier Class level full-time. But on the other side of the coin, it's not the same Moto2 and Moto3 compared to what it was back in those days, and I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we were to say that Moto2 and Moto3 now is what those classes were back then. I grew up in a time when Max Biaggi didn't move up for years because he was one of the greatest 250 riders of all time. Riders took their time coming up the classes when there was a definitive great option for them to do so. And as RJ quietly alluded to, you could make a career as a medium or lightweight class rider and be just fine.
Yeah. On the point of Capirossi, like, he was a 2-time 125 world champion, climbed the ladder, went up to 500 cc's, didn't like it the first time, went back down, won a 3rd world title in 250 cc's, and then went up to be a very good rider for the next decade plus in MotoGP.
Is that enough to be called a Hall of Famer?
Back then, manufacturers would pour in as much resources into the lower class bikes because they were, in a sense, their own mini championships, their own, like back in the 60s, Honda was pouring more into the 250 bikes than they were every other class.
Do you remember Derby? Back in the day, when Derby was the lower class king of developing bikes on that level. Those were the days, man. It's not the same now. I mean, Moto 3 now is a two-manufacturer chassis race between KTM and Honda, and it's looking like it's going to be a one-make series when they replace it in a couple of years' time. And Moto 2...
They're teetering on spec.
They are teetering on spec, and Moto 2 essentially is almost spec now as it is. They're all on Triumph engines, 750cc, 765 to be precise, and there's only really two competitive chassis now. It's either Calyx or Boscoscuro, essentially. So they're not what they were now, and I think we'd be kidding ourselves to say it wasn't. And as I mentioned on the show about a month ago, do we care about Moto 2 and Moto 3 on the same level that we did as bike fans 20 years ago when it was 250 and 125? Probably not.
No.
So with that in mind, is Dorna kind of justified shunting him to the back? I guess. But it's still shitty, a situation, because there's a lot of people that do earn their bread in that side of the paddock, and them being shoved into temporary accommodation, tents rather than garages, and them basically being the poor man's relation while the main sport becomes the headline in focus, sucks, because it's going to turn Moto 2 and Moto 3 into riders for hire, because they're not going to be able to make money, they're not going to get activations, they're not going to get sponsors if they're barely on TV. That's why Moto E's gone the way of the dodo. Same principle.
And by the way, could you imagine, and I hate to bring up the whole, Formula One people versus that MotoGP crowd. I know, but just imagine telling some of these people, hey, back in the day, you could make a career running 15, 20 years in the equivalent of Formula 2 and Formula 3. People are already losing their mind that Richard Verschuur is in his 5th season of Formula 2.
They lost their mind last week when it was announced that they were going to have a €1 million prize pool for Formula 3. Oh, €300,000 of funding for the champion if he moves up to F2 in a sport where you need $3 million for a drive worth a damn.
Hey, don't forget, Pirelli's going to match that $300,000, baby. You get 20% of the way there.
Horses for courses, as my dad would say. So to a degree, my overall point is, I get it. I'm not going to completely clown on Dorna for this one, because from a business standpoint, from a prestige standpoint, the sport has changed. It's a different ball game, and Moto 2 and Moto 3 now are just not what the 250 and 125 class was in my day when I was growing up as a bike fan, let alone, the pre-MotoGP era, I guess you can call it, when it became MotoGP in 2001. But it doesn't make the situation any less shitty for those just directly effects. And you're going to see a knock-on effect for Moto 2 and Moto 3 if this keeps up, and that is going to suck, because I do care about those series. I've said it before. Describe Pedro Acosta without his Moto 2 or 3 success.
Very fast, crashes a lot, hates his team.
Yeah. Not the fact he was the second youngest Moto 3 and Moto 2 champion of all time.
Not the fact that he won from pit lane in his second ever start.
Or David Alonso, who won 14 Moto 3 races last year and was so good. Even MotoGP's World Feed commentator voted him for Rider of the Year in the Motorsport 101 Awards last year. Shh, don't tell anyone. But you get the gist.
That's getting put on the cutting room floor.
Or will it?
You'll
have to listen to find out. If you're listening, buddy, forgive me on that one. I'd rather ask for forgiveness and permission on this one. But he was a bit good last year. But you get the gist. It's the cruel nature of business and the fact that there's no money in junior racing. That's just the reality of motorsport.
And that's what the lower categories are now. It's junior racing. If you want to make a career in not MotoGP World Championships, you are running production-based superbikes. There's just no other way to put it.
I don't like it any more than anybody else does, but it's just
This is the races.
This is the races, and no one. It's how, as a quick side note, I tell people that are Formula One Academy fans, and then they act surprised when Dorian Pan isn't being thrust into a big role. I tell them the same thing. You need someone that is prepared to invest tens of millions of dollars into a black hole to fund and help grassroots level racing and karting, and going into schools and telling people that this is worth doing from the time they're children, and you're not going to get any credit for it, you're not going to get any activations for it, you're going to be guaranteed to lose his money. You can't ask people to do that. It's the same principle in junior racing across the board. It is
business.
It's either you're getting people into Formula One in the best way possible, or it's going to make money. You can't do both. It's impossible in this climate. You can't do it. And I wish more people could understand that. And because we are all predominantly F1 fans first, we've seen that model play out in Formula One, and I think it's something that a lot of bike fans just don't understand. It is what it is in that sense. Before we get out of here... Yeah, we've got a couple more city moves before we get out of here real quick. Miggy, he's got confirmation earlier this week he's going to BMW's World Superbike team to replace Toprak. No big deal.
Is that what he's trying to do?
Well, what else would you describe it? Are you going to be more modest? Yeah, he's replacing Michael van der Mark. Yeah.
He's trying to fill some Godzilla-sized shoes.
This is an interesting trade. It snuck up on me that Miguel Oliveira is already 30, and this seems like this is like a logical point where like you've just crested the apex of your career. But man, did it feel to me like Miguel Oliveira was probably sent to that Superbikes farm up north like a year or two too early, and then you realize, my God, he has been beaten up the last few years.
In the most painful way, like Miguel Oliveira has fallen through the cracks, not through being bad, but by only being a Hall of Very Gooder. Right, this is a 5-time Grand Prix winner.
That's not a fluke. He has one less win than Alex Rins. Like, he has 5 KTM MotoGP wins. That is a phenomenal achievement. Do not get it twisted. That is a hard thing to do. Like, you know what's wild? I looked at this the other day. There's only, I think, 25 riders ever that have got double-digit MotoGP wins at the Premier Class level. Even getting to 10 is extremely difficult. The threshold is Maverick Vinales, who has precisely 10 top-flight wins. Miggy has 5. And he won them rain, shine, tech-free, factory team. He was a talisman for KTM, and I've got to remember as well, he was this close to winning a Moto3 World title. He nearly pulled back a nearly 90-point deficit against Danny Kent back in the day, and he only missed out on a Moto2 World title to some guy called Pecco Bagnaia by a handful of points back in 2018. This is a phenomenal bike rider. I've said it before. He has proven his success on every level of the ladder. And as Cam alluded to, I think he's just fallen through the cracks via being in the wrong place at the wrong time and then injuries. He's had so many unfortunate injuries over the last 3 or 4 years that have just completely derailed his career.
And even on top of that, like, KTM employing their sponsor's strategy of one more rider will fix it has achieved precisely fuck all. And he was a victim of that when really, what has KTM's set of riders achieved in the meantime?
Brad Binder's been solid. Pedro Acosta, I feel, will get it right. Remember, he's still very young in his Premier Class career. There's no doubt about it.
Bigger point being that Miggy really was not the problem.
Yeah.
No. I think most people that know KTM know that he was never the issue. Pedro Acosta was going to be a success no matter what factory he rode for. He's a freak talent.
Yeah.
You know.
Great point. Remember Remy Gardner?
They had Remy Gardner and Raul Fernandez, who was fresh off arguably a better rookie Moto2 season than Marc Marquez had. And they blew that.
Wasted them both.
They had the greatest Moto2 team setup ever, and they got nothing out of the pair of them. Shit's wild.
This is the biking equivalent of 2017 AJ Foyt Racing. More on that in our next episode.
He's gone, and Somkiat Chantra, we finally got confirmation, is going over to Worlds as well. He's going to be part of the new Honda World Superbike team. They've also had a complete reboot. Xavi Vierge and Ika Lecuona are both on the way out. In comes Somkiat Chantra and Jake Dixon, a 2021 Moto2 death lineup if I've ever seen one.
Unfortunately, it's on the Honda Fireblade, so they're going to be finishing a spicy 7th and 8th every round.
But Jake Dixon will get tons and tons of pub from TNT, and
The
for
Glaze.
Somcat, just reset. Forget this whole MotoGP thing with LCR ever happened.
All I'm saying is, as a TNT Sports enjoyer in inverted commas, Moto2 races just got a lot easier to watch next year. I'll tell you that.
Dog, you're bringing the average age of the average TNT Sports subscriber down exponentially.
Oof.
You know what was wild the other day? I found out that the average TNT Sports subscriber is 57 years old. Whew. Whew.
It's about the average age of the Inside the NBA panel, but at least they're funny.
Yeah.
3 rings, Chuck. 3 rings.
3 rings, yeah.
7 rings. 9 rings. Enough rings.
Yeah.
Marc Marquez has enough rings. And he still might get some more on the way out.
Indeed. MotoGP is back this weekend. The Indonesian Grand Prix for Mandalika. Hopefully the track stays nice and crispy this time so we don't get people sliding off in every direction. Another early start for us flyaway fans in Europe, but we'll soldier it on. We'll figure it out. Good luck, America. 3 a.m. start and all that.
Absolute garbage.
Also, one of 2 rounds that Mark has not won around so far on the calendar. He's missing that, and he's missing Portimao. It's going to be interesting to see if we can tick off those 2 on the bingo sheet. Also, Formula 1 this weekend as well. They're back for the Singapore Grand Prix as well. So Southeast Asia, stand up. It's going to be a very spicy
Disgusting
weekend.
Time zones.
Oof. Not so bad for the Europeans, but man, the Americans are going through it. Oof. Not fun.
We're going through it in a lot of ways, not just through this.
Kidding. More on that on next week's pair of recordings. But
Ken McLaren shut down Max Verstappen's title charge the way our government shut down today.
We shall see. Until then, they've been Cameron Buckley and RJ O'Connell. I've been Dre Harrison. Thank you very much for watching. And remember, if in doubt, it's always been more than a number. Sayonara.
Later, yo!
Now and forever. And on our next episode, that damn Spaniard.